What you're looking at right now, and I have to think through this because there's a specific word I want to use, but I want to get to it. I want to use the word dire. Everybody wants to go back and say, well, it's always been like this in history. No, we've never had a president like this. Not this insane, not based on this type of QAnon, white nationalist, sort of fascist, authoritarian leading stuff. It's hard to get your head around because he says this stuff out loud. It's not like we're guessing. So I think we're in a very dire place when it comes to the United States. And the only way to get out of that is to completely and politically and diabolically quash the MAGA movement. I never wanted to run for office again. I've changed my mind.
Hello and welcome to the Trump Report. I'm Louis Sykes. Today we are joined in Nook, Greenland by Denver Riggleman, a former Republican congressman and a former member of the January 6th committee that investigated the storming of the US Capitol building. Denver, thank you very much for joining me today.
I'm glad to be here.
Well, Denver, it has been a whirlwind week, which explains why we are talking now in Nook, Greenland. Thank you very much again for joining me. I just wonder if you can sum up how, first of all, your thoughts on Donald Trump's flurry of activity around Greenland and his attempt to lay claim to this island.
I'm going to use the word of all the Greenlanders that I interviewed, I talked to on the street, the kids coming up to me, they've used one word: madness. Madness. And it's been something, I've been trying to actually encapsulate it with it's crazy, insanity, hyperbolic, right? Just completely unhinged. But I think madness is the one thing that really comes to mind after talking to everybody here and how they feel about Donald Trump and what he's doing.
And how dangerous is this path that the US is taking at the moment in terms of the damage it can do, not only to US alliances themselves, but the rules-based order that we, up until maybe a year ago, thought was a pretty solid way that we were going to continue organizing the world?
You never thought that you would see other countries organizing trade deals or arms deals around the United States, especially NATO partners, in a way that they're doing now. You talk about rules-based order, or you're talking about even traditions that go back for generations. It's hard to get your arms around somebody like a Donald Trump. And I'm going to just be specific here. That's a felon. It's been adjudicated for sexual abuse. Companies have found liable for fraud. Right, somebody who's obviously a misogynist with some of the things that he said. That's the least of it. Somebody like that is actually making these decisions for the United States and us being looked at as an irresponsible actor globally. I think when I talk about U.S., here we are in Greenland, I think Greenland really is the pivot point, whether the U.S. is taken seriously going forward, but actually if the U.S. is isolated away from some of these alliances, and how do we get that trust back? And when you talk to people here, I think there's this shock that this is our friend that we've had for generations. How would they want to? Why would they want to hurt us? Why would they want to invade us? Why would they want to force a purchase on us? And the thing that bothers me most about an American who held these ideals dear is that why would we, as Americans, with our history, look at another country and say we want to rip their sovereignty away, their self-determination? And I think it's a very sobering thought.
And what do you think the impact will be on the NATO and especially European alliances that for so long were a real stalwart of the US's influence around the world?
Louis, I think there's already an impact. I think it would take decades for us to reestablish trust, regardless of a new president that we would have elected. And if it's a MAGA downstream president like a J.D. Vance or a Rubio, I still think every single nation that was part of the NATO alliance, and in the EU too, let's just take everybody. I think everybody looks at the United States as an irresponsible actor with policy that's based on fantasy, conspiracy theories, and I would say playbooks like Project 2025. I don't know how many people are aware of this, but playbooks written by far-right organizations like Heritage and the Federal Society in the United States. How dare us pursue policies that are not rooted in any type of sanity or any type of real democratic institutional knowledge and history, but in this bizarre sort of quasi-authoritarian, flow down president that has complete power. I don't know how we actually get it back after what's happened now. I think that's what I'm saying with who I'm talking to in Greenland, but also, fortunately, I do have about 20, 25 years of military and technical CEO experience, and I got to be a congressman for a bit, and things like that. So, using all that experience, I think it's very frightening what's happening to the United States.
And let's dig into some of that military experience if we can.
Sure.
We've heard a lot of things out of the White House about security, the need for Greenland as some sort of security asset, and how this can't be just a sharing deal. The US wants some level of sovereignty over Greenland. That may not have come to pass from what we understand. But what do you make of these claims about the Golden Dome being based here in Greenland somehow? The idea that Russian or Chinese warships would come down from north of the Arctic and reach here into southern Greenland. Do you think there's any validity to those claims?
I think in the fevered imaginations of some of the policy advisors around Trump, there's probably some, credibility in the claims as it's coming out of their mouth, sort of like diarrhea of the mouth. But I think when you're talking about Golden Dome itself and you're talking about what a big project that is, my background is integrated air defense systems. I remember a Goodfellow Air Force Base, my first training with, what they call double-digit SAMs, right? We started with something like an SA-2, but then all of a sudden you're in SA-10s, you're in SA-15s, right? And then you're in SA-20s, oh lordy, right? Knowing integrated air defense systems, and when you're talking about protecting all of America with some kind of massive dome type structure where every single missile can be intercepted. In this new era of hypersonics with ICBMs, even with our technology right now, it feels like $1 trillion project or more. And even then, I think it's a lark. It's quixotic. So at this point, I think Golden Dome is a joke. And I think it's a boondoggle for the large investors and donors that are connected to the Trump family and to the Republican Party. And when you look what they did with, and I know I'm getting a little technical with federal acquisition regulations, it looks like it's the people who sign loyalty pledges that are getting the contracts. If you're talking about Anduril, Palantir, things like that. So I think Golden Dome is a joke. I think that's all sort of a boondoggle for big money flows for the DoD, but it also is signaling to people that maybe we have some crazies that are in power, but that we're also willing to do anything for power. And I think when you put both of that together, when you took insane plans that seemed so over their horizon and crazy, and you're talking about us coming after Greenland, it almost, I think it unhinges people because we do have a $1 trillion military and we are powerful. But I tell you what, after talking to Greenlanders, I don't think they want any peace of walking through these streets. 57,000 people, 35,000 long guns is a low estimate. And every single Greenlander I talked to said, listen, we loved America, but if they were to walk our streets, we'll die here fighting.
And you've been across Nuuk in the last few days, for the last week essentially. You've spoken to a lot of locals. I'm going to include some of that footage here, and we'll take a quick look.
And I feel like they're almost afraid to say rage, but it's been frustration, anger,
Yes,
disbelief,
exactly.
insanity, crazy. I think that's what we've been hearing.
I said madness. I mean,
madness, right?
And when the power cut was last night, I mean,
That's
I was
what
just like I
You're
told,
smart.
like I told Ola, I was like, the first thing was like, I'm not about to say something bad, but damn, it happened. I called my friends, and we were all like, "Is this really the Americans? Not the American people, obviously.
No, it's
Trump,
okay.
I will prefer to say."
So that power outage, we were talking to some other individuals, and thank you for Orla, that they immediately talked about hotlines lighting up, people calling.
Yeah.
The Americans are coming.
Yeah, not the Americans, the Trump soldiers.
I can think about it, war in Greenland. So it's frightening. We don't have a war in this town.
I would be one of those that would, pick up my rifle and do something. And I know many people have been talking about it here in Greenland. Under the radar, just when you talk to one another, what would you do? Pick up a rifle.
It feels like psychological warfare on the people who live here. It's everything.
You asked an incredible question when we came in, like, what are you doing here, right? And that's great. And the reason we are here is we've also had trips to Ukraine. And I think part of it too is this is a veteran organization and called Save America. And what they wanted us to do was they were coming over here to actually do that sort of that olive branch and to talk to individuals about what's happening and to express our support for Greenland. But then, I'm here too for the same reason, is that how in the hell do you guys feel about this, I guess is the question.
Back in the days, you can say.
Back in the day.
Yeah, everything was just so good. We had we worked together up here and everybody was welcome. It didn't matter who you were, American, Danish, Greenlandic. We just worked together. That's not happening anymore. I'm sorry to say it, but it's not happening anymore. Whenever somebody talks about US dollars, Americans, just talking English in here or wherever you come around the city, you take a step back because it's horrible.
This is a very small part of people.
Yes.
And if we go against American people, then we do exactly what Trump does to others.
So how do we regain the trust?
Oh, that's a difficult question.
When something like this happens, we need to figure out a way to trust the Americans again. If the Americans come here and we get occupied and all of that, all the things we have been fearing for the last year or so, if that happens, let's see what. I'm not sure I'm going to be allowed to be here. I'm going to be deported.
I hope for diplomacy and relations to work this out. But I must say that I would sleep way better in the night if they had a new president in the US. Just something else. Just something else than Donald Trump.
Trump could have come here with diplomacy and some ministers and whatever they're called and just say, we have a request. Is it possible for us to expand in our current positions that we already, we have old bases here. Is it possible for us to put more soldiers here? If they had done that, they would have gotten it.
We are not for the sale. We are not for the sale, even me in our country, because it's very, very important for us that we have a relationship with Europe and Denmark, and it's very important for us that we have independence of Greenland, because we don't supporting for Trump's idea and he will take Greenland with the power. It's not right.
And I just want to say, what was the sense that you got from Greenlanders about how they feel about the US now, and what they think about Americans and the Trump administration?
It's probably your hardest question. When we first got here, I think people were a little shocked that a former congressman and a contingent of people who really cared about what was happening in Greenland were here. And at first, they said they were easy to separate, those who support Trump and Americans who aren't insane. And again, that goes back to the word that they kept using. It looks like madness to them in America. And it's not just us wanting to invade Greenland, Louis. It was also talking about looking what ICE was doing on the streets of America, the violence in America. They don't want that here. So I was having this parallel conversation about it just wasn't the invasion of Greenland. They really love their life here. They don't want to be America. Wow, it's pretty powerful. But as the conversations went on, it started to get more and more blunt and honest, and that it was difficult to separate the American government from Americans here on the ground. Ooh, that's something. And I sort of expected that. And you find yourself almost apologizing to the Greenlanders. Here's the thing. We have this bizarre culture in the US, this sort of performative gun culture. That's a little bit weird, insane, right? I got an AR-15 with a laser sight, right? And, they live in a freaking suburban neighborhood, and the biggest animal they ever actually come in contact with is their dog or a large cat. So that's really what it is. Here, it's a real gun culture. They hunt all the time, and it's everyone. They're incredible shots. They love what they do. They know the terrain. And it's funny, it's a quiet, dignified gun culture. And they also quiet and dignified. I would not want to mess with them anywhere on this terrain. So you have three things happening now. And you're managing this conversation of, we don't want to be like America. We don't like America because they're invading, and we would defend our country to the death, and we're really good shots. And so this is how it sort of went every single conversation. So it was quite interesting.
And a year ago there were fishery protection vessels, I think 2 at most, a small number of Arctic troops in training, and a kind of feeling that this idea of an invasion, I mean, people weren't even considering it probably 2 years ago. We're here now in Greenland. There are troops in some areas of Nuuk on the streets,
Yes.
in a limited sense. There are now 3 vessels here in Greenland. There's been European troops deployed here, allied to Greenland and to NATO. America was invited to come on exercises here and didn't. We've had warnings issued to locals here saying stock up on hunting supplies and ammunition, and stock up on other supplies. How close do you think, at least from the Greenlanders' perspective, and perhaps from the US perspective as well, how close do you think we came to some sort of clash here?
Crazy is hard to predict. But after seeing Venezuela, I have a feeling they thought it was over 50%. There was something else in those warnings. It was about information warfare, right? Propaganda operations that were going on here, which was really interesting. And there's I have to thank other intelligence officers in this room, right? I watched some things today that was very helpful on that. But I think what you're looking at is sort of this multi-pronged approach is how do you, and I've had this conversation, how do you predict crazy? How do you predict something that doesn't match norms? And then you have to look at past performance of Donald Trump himself. And now you're trying to predict something that's pretty much unhinged or doesn't have sort of a flow down of some type of strategic, real decision making. I think it was very close. And I think when you combine, in their minds, and I want to be, square about that. But when you talk about America, I don't think we would have been that surprised if troops were deployed towards Greenland, at least as a show of force. Now, if that happened, I think that ends America. It's done. If we come into this country, we're ended as any type of viable partner in anywhere in the world. And I think that's it doesn't make sense.
And yet some of these more, we can, I think, use the word aggressive threats are still continuing. We think of the NATO alliance, we usually think of Europe, but now Canada is continuing to trade words with the White House. We've heard in recent days threats of US jets could overfly Canadian airspace. There's this resumption of Donald Trump using this language about Canada becoming the 51st state. How is it almost more damaging for US international relations when there is a nation right next door to the US that is now facing this sort of language, a nation that is easily accessible from the ground?
Well, once we invade Canada, we have to invade Mexico, right? I mean, let's go. We want a full America. They're putting up maps with the U.S. flag in Canada and Greenland. You've seen this ridiculousness. And it's the ludicrous, I would say, thoughts and patterns of a far-right nationalist, almost cult-like behavior that's going on in the United States. And it's grifters and influencers that are pushing people down this lane. And I think that's the big weakness of the U.S. is it seems like that ignorance is metastasized on a level that's never been seen. I've had people tell me, like, well, Denver, in history, there's always been propaganda and information operations. Yeah, but we haven't had social media. We haven't had algorithmic warfare. And I think when people understand algorithmic warfare and the fact that you can go unicast, if I may get a little technical here, sir, I had an incredible professor. Well, it wasn't a professor, it was in Intel. He said, we've gone from a multicast to a unicast world, right? Where you have people can actually self-select their echo chamber and be radicalized in that echo chamber. And it's this confirmation bias on steroids that eventually turns into almost delusion. So I think we have a conspiratorial and fantasy-based policy going on with the United States. And when you're talking about Canada and Mexico to come, full circle, Trump believes that. We can't say anymore that he's just blustering for some kind of bizarre strategic negotiating tactic. It's ludicrous. And I think Canada is right to push back because there's one thing about Trump all of us has learned. He's a bully that folds under pressure. But sometimes bullies like to cheat and come back around the other side. And I think that's what's going to happen here in Greenland if we can come full circle. I think by the middle of February, you're going to have more threats. I think once he sorts what's going on with ICE and with Canada and with tariffs, I think he comes back this way because he was embarrassed and he got crushed in Davos.
And on Canada, Mark Carney, the Canadian Prime Minister, it's fair to say, is not taking this lying down. There's been threats now that the Canadians might themselves and in alliance with other nations that feel they're being mistreated on tariffs especially, sell off US, I believe it's Treasury bonds. How damaging could that become for the US and the US economy?
Yeah, if you get your loan called on the only car you have, you're in trouble. You're not driving. And I think what's happened, people now realize how leveraged the United States is, and the bad policies of presidents before, generations, have led us to this point. We are leveraged. And, when you look at worldwide wealth, yeah, we're pretty damn rich. But if you put all the other countries together, we're in trouble. Not just economically, but militarily too. And I think, again, when you have this bluster and this belief system that overrides reality and facts, and they think somehow that there's some large sky fairy telling them what they're supposed to do, I think at that point we have real problems. And we're looking at that right now. So I think Carney's a smart guy. By the way, everybody should look into his past. He knows how economics actually works. He's pretty good. His financial instrument knowledge, I think, is much better than Donald Trump's.
And if that goes ahead, that selling off of US Treasury bonds by multiple nations, I think it's Japan is included in this list, Canada obviously. What sort of impact do you understand that could have on the US economy?
The U.S. economy today, and I don't know how prescient this might be, but Jerome Powell, locked in there was no raise or lowering of interest rates. It seems that maybe employment has somehow solidified, but consumer confidence is the lowest since 2014. I think our economy is already rocky. And by the way, nobody trusts the numbers coming out of the government anyway, because all the smart people were fired. You have to, there's not, and I know this is crazy, people watching this, not everybody signed loyalty pledges. They just weren't going to do that. I do believe right now that the economy, any type of tickle over the edge, I think you're talking about a flow down effect that's going to be brutal. And with the tariffs already taking so much stuffing out of the manufacturing industry, and with the lower employed individuals, right, who probably should be working in higher end jobs, but they're working 2 jobs instead, then you've got service monies that aren't being used. The downstream effect on the economy is going to be massive. And I think that's what our former allies, sadly, are telling us. Mess with us, and yeah, you guys have all the planes and all the ships, but you're also $38 trillion in debt, and your economy ain't great. And if you really want to go down this path, we're willing to do it, because you are willing to go down this path to our people in our countries, and that's a scary proposition for the United States.
Minnesota, I used the word whirlwind at the start of this interview. I think that applies to national policy in the US as well at the moment. What have you made of what we have seen there? I suppose just in the last month, 2 people now dead, shot by ICE or border federal agents sent by the MAGA administration. What are your thoughts on that?
First of all, how do you rationalize the death of Renee and Alex? It's so incredibly tragic. With those deaths, though, comes something that's been bizarre and maybe long-term in a positive way for the whole of the nation. Not to say that anybody's deaths are worth that, but it seems like there's a rift in MAGA or an infection that I've noticed, almost a sepsis, that's starting to creep in. MAGA is inherently nationalistic, so you're talking about Trump starting wars, around the world. And yeah, I put that in air quotes. I don't know if anybody's watching, it's audio only, but yeah, starting wars around the country, that's been hurtful. But there's some other things going on with the economy, with tariffs, right? Things of that nature. But also, again, the Epstein files still haven't been released. And those 3 things, Epstein files, economy, healthcare, I'll put that in one, and starting wars, those are 3 things that are completely anti-MAGA. But there's this thing with ICE where the administration has blinked with Bovino being sent back home. You got Tom Homan coming in. Now, don't get me wrong. Bringing Tom Homan to help Bovino is like using gonorrhea to cure syphilis, right? But I think that, that's what's going on in America. But again, it's still I would say, some kind of indicator that MAGA is hurting. And now with the Second Amendment stuff, you saw Trump coming out against guns, ludicrous. It seems like Trump doesn't know where he's at, doesn't know what he's doing. And now you see this sort of collapse happening. And I think it started with Minnesota. Actually, it probably started a little bit beforehand, let's be honest, with all the ICE raids. And there's been a lot more than 2 killed. But I do believe what you're seeing right now is almost a dissembling. And I've never been this optimistic in the last 7 years. I want to let you know this, my friend. There's been a dissembling of MAGA. And I think we are now seeing where the midterms could really determine where America is going, and maybe start trying to rebuild the trust in 2026, the end of this year, with our allies.
And where do you think the Trump administration goes from here? I mean, they do appear to be at a crisis point now over international and national policy. You are a former Republican congressman. You I believe, were in the administration in some capacity, the first Trump administration. What do you think they are going to be thinking, and what do you think lies in the future of the MAGA movement and the Trump administration?
Trump administration needs a couple things. They need to do a couple things that they don't know how to do. And that's to get out of this death spiral, literally with ICE, but also with their foreign policy mistakes. The thing is, Trump is such an egomaniac and narcissist that the people around him have to follow his lead. So here's what I think is going to happen. I think the next step is, in the next week or so, all the sword rattling for bombing Iran is going to happen. That they have to have something else, even though it's against what he went, campaigned against with not starting foreign wars. Iran's back on the table. And why is Iran back on the table also? Because of the failure of really taking out the nuclear facilities, which was a joke. That's why I think Greenland is back in play here soon, right? It's always a horseshoe with this guy. He's going to fold. He gets embarrassed. He does something dumber. You have to almost try to predict with Trump that way. As far as ICE is concerned, they have to de-escalate. If they don't de-escalate, I also think you're seeing independence. I have never seen anything like this. When you start getting independence between 70 and 80% against Trump, that's insane. Lastly, only 12 states have positive favorability ratings for Trump now of the 50 states. This is something I never thought I would see. So I think right now they really can only keep participating in activities that are damaging to try to keep America's attention off of what's really happening on the ground.
And we've discussed there what all of the recent events mean for the MAGA movement. Where do you see the direction of the US more widely, and how would you judge the situation your nation finds itself in today? I mean, you've been in important places through several inflection points in US history.
Unfortunate, or unfortunate, depending on the place.
You were serving at the time 9/11 happened, I believe.
Sure was.
As I say, you were in the first Trump administration. You were on the January 6th committee,
Yes.
and you also did some work with Democrats as well.
Yes.
Pretty big events you've covered, in just since the turn of the century. How severe is the situation now compared to those other events?
People try to. Thanks for the easy questions. I really appreciate it, Lee. I think what you're looking at right now, and I have to think through this because there's a specific word I want to use, but I want to get to it. I want to use the word dire. Everybody wants to go back and say, well, it's always been like this in history. No, we've never had a president like this. Not this insane, not based on this type of QAnon, white nationalist, sort of fascist, authoritarian leading stuff. It's hard to get your head around because he says this stuff out loud. It's not like we're guessing. So I think we're in a very dire place when it comes to the United States. And the only way to get out of that is to completely and politically and diabolically quash the MAGA movement. There's no way around it. I don't know if the Democrats and independents have the stones for it. That's what worries me too. There hasn't really been any proof that they got the intestinal fortitude to do what they got to do. Do you think the Democrats win the majority in 26 are going to investigate Trump? Half-assed maybe. If they impeach in the House, they're going to get a conviction in the Senate? No, because there's not enough Republicans with actual courage. The Republicans have to step up. And seeing Ted Cruz say that they might impeach Trump, insane. Seeing Tom Tillis coming out against, Kristi Noem, seeing Murkowski coming out against Noem. Looking at Don Bacon, the congressman, the former Air Force one-star general, really rocking and rolling now as a Republican. That's what has to happen. But I'm telling you right now, I think 2026 is not only going to be one of the swing moment in history for the United States, but it's also going to be a violent one. And again, that's the fear too. Are we willing to prosecute? Are we willing to investigate the people who've done these things? I don't know, bud. I think it's got to be an all-in. There's no more half-stepping. And I don't know if those on the other side of the MAGA fence have the intestinal fortitude to do what needs to be done.
And if the Democrats, you don't believe, form a real opposition at the moment, and if you're not sure that Republicans can oppose Donald Trump, who is there left to try and curb what may well be a significant overreach by this administration?
A new breed, somebody, a party or people in the Democratic Republican Party who come together in a way that makes sense. The Republican Party is dead as any type of traditional Republican Party. The Democratic Party still likes to go a little bit, nutty on the other side because we are a bit of a center-right country. And they do concentrate on issues that are easy to actually propagandize and radicalize based on the Christian movements and the MAGA side. All this is happening. But boy, wouldn't it be something if this is the time for a third party or third way? And he goes, Denver, no, America's not built like this, but it has to happen. Even me, and I know, listen, I don't know how intimate we want to get with this interview, but knowing you, the people that we've been here, I never wanted to run for office again. I've changed my mind. And I think being here in Greenland, what I did in Ukraine, what I've seen in America, what I've seen with my business interests, what I've seen with my own wife and our distilleries and the tariff issues and the supply chain issues caused arbitrarily by bad decisions from a president and a Congress that's completely unwilling to do their job, just really almost like the Duma, right? I mean, that's what's happening. I think people like me, the people that are on this trip, I think they have to even get more involved. They think they're involved, you got to do more. We got to lean forward further. There's an old military saying, there's a fine line between leaning forward and bending over, right? You don't, but I think it is time for us to lean forward and do as much as we can. And I think, on this trip, I've decided I am going to run again. I have an idea what I think I'm going to do, but there has to be people who run, whether it's for one party or another. I can't run as a Republican. It would have to be as a blue dog Democrat or as an independent. But I got to get involved again because I'm 55 and I almost feel like a coward if I don't. And am I? No. I mean, it's ridiculous. Why aren't everybody else running? But the thing is, I've been there, done that. I got the card. I sort of know how to do it, regardless of the shortened career because of QAnon and COVID. But I think it's time for people like me and those here and people around the country to get involved. And that's the only way we save it.
Where would you run then? Where are you thinking of running and going back into politics?
It's a bit down the line. But governor of Virginia in 29, I have been asked to run for some other things, but I think an executive position is where I need to be now, not legislative. And not because I'm bragging or arrogant, it's because I've been there, done that also. And I think at an executive level, based on what I've done in my life, I think that's what I need to run for next.
So you do still believe there is a political solution to what you and many others think is a pretty major political problem in the United States? Is it still? Do you believe, even though we've seen a significant change in the way U.S. politics works, there is still influence in going into U.S. politics?
I think there still has to be statesmen, stateswomen, statespeople. But I think I could be a statesman, and I think with my background, regardless of the disinformation that's pushed out about me from everyone because they're scared to death of me. I think and I'm an expert in it. I think there has to come a time where you still think that the way that the American political system, the dream that's America is set up, that you have to be as a man, I have to be a statesman, somebody who cares about others, but also somebody who is willing to drag an axe into a bar fight, And I think you can combine that. And I think I might just be mean enough and just kind enough at the same time to maybe pull it off.
And then I understand you are going to be going on from here to Denmark to participate in the veterans protest there over more comments out of the Trump administration in recent days about how they don't believe EU allies have been there for them. What is your message for the people of Denmark and Greenland as well?
I think there has to be a quiet, stoic support for the veterans who supported the United States of America over these generations. And when you're 9/11, you can't forget who is beside you, shoulder to shoulder. You know, when you have an Article 5, right, when you get attacked and everybody comes to your aid without questions asked, you have to stand with them. And there's a love, the brothers and sisters of the military when you're with them. And how dare our president castigate or threaten or belittle or disrespect the service of those soldiers who stood with us through thick and thin. And so fortunately, I was in contact with the Danish ambassador, with those who have organized, and I am fortunate. I feel lucky that they would even want me involved in a silent march to commemorate the Danish veterans. And I'm honored to be there. And I just can't believe they would even welcome me, but they did call me and ask me to participate. So yeah, I'm leaving tomorrow.
Well, Denver Riggleman, thank you very much for joining me today, Denver Riggleman, former US Republican congressman and veteran of the US Air Force. Thank you for joining me today on the Trump Report.
My friend.